Welcome to the All Podcast. This is Josh Van Zweden, a licensed social worker, and...
Hi, this is Lashana, also a licensed social worker.
All right, today's the day we talk about boundaries. We sort of set you up last week about, at the end of our show, saying that we'd talk about boundaries, and here we are, one of the topics that is complex for me, and I sort of study this stuff and teach this stuff, right? How do you feel about the topic?
I think boundaries are tough for most people, actually. I think it's something that we, as human beings, go back and forth on or with for the entirety of our lives.
I believe it, because we're in different chapters and phases and stages of development and all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
So figuring them out is probably not something we can do, but we can continue to learn always and improve and understand ourselves more wholly.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So boundaries, kind of the edges of ourselves, right? They define us, they keep us safe, they keep us ourselves, and really should be held as sacred, right? Because they help us remain our authentic selves. And I intentionally use the word sacred because we want to hold them in the forefront a lot of times, right? A lot of times, like our own values and spirituality and things like that, those things need to be our lens through which we see things, right? And those sometimes are part of our boundaries as well, right? So what are the edges of ourselves, and how do we let people know where those edges are? You know, and that's the establishment of me and the establishment of who I am and who I'll not allow other people's to impact, right?
I love the term sacred. I love that you use that when you're talking about the establishment of me. I think that is so powerful because something sacred, we hold that near and dear to us.
Right.
And often we don't hold ourselves near and dear, right? We always think of another person or another thing or whatever as something sacred, but boundaries talks about us, me, you, right?
Right. Isn't that crazy that we don't hold ourselves near and dear to ourselves, right?
Yeah. So for me, being aware of what is unacceptable and the normalizing of saying no, which is terribly difficult.
Wow. Yes.
Yeah. Doing what is best for you and knowing that it's not your responsibility to sacrifice yourself for others.
What?
Yeah. And I did get that from our mindfullife.com. But boundaries are hard lines, if you will. So think of them as non-negotiables.
Yeah, right. I like that, non-negotiable. And it helps us define what they are too, right?
Yes.
And when we know what they are, it's easier to relay them to people. Sometimes we tend to draw boundaries in the sand and they're easy to erase, or sometimes we let people step over them and cross them, and then we don't understand where we begin and where we end. And I think that's what's confusing sometimes.
It is confusing, but we started out with two big words, so sacred and sacrifice.
Wow. 2 S's. Was that planned or what? Right? Sacred and sacrifice. Yeah. Wow. Is there an appropriate time for sacrifice?
Absolutely. And I think boundaries are a great way of determining that, right? Because I think, again, if we believe something or hold something sacred to us, we're willing generally to make a sacrifice for that.
Right.
And like you were saying, boundaries can change, they can be blurred, they can be crossed, right? All of those things. And I think sometimes when sacrifice is a question, all of those things can be there too. Like, how do we determine what we can or if we will sacrifice?
Right. Right. It keeps us healthy of understanding what's a healthy sacrifice and what's not. Yep. And it is. I like how you said that. The things we hold sacred to us, oftentimes we can sacrifice ourselves for those things because that's who we are, right? Yeah. Boundaries are an establishment is our next heading. We try to break things down and organize our conversations together, and we try to keep them very conversational for you as the listener to sort of feel like you're in the room with us and engaging with the conversation with us, and hopefully having that desire to keep the conversation going with other people, right?
Yeah.
how we pay it forward. But establishing ourselves is one of the hardest things to do for most people. Some people have a pretty good talent at understanding what their boundaries are and defining them clearly and sticking with them and things of that nature. But it's not always that easy, depending on different stages in our lives and, developmental stages of course, those teenage years, those younger years when we want to belong to something so much that we hold that belonging almost sacred, but we're pursuing it to a degree where that fitting in piece causes us to do things that aren't us.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. And for me, part of the establishment of boundaries, right? Communication is key. And as you said, some individuals are very good at setting boundaries. Just that's something that they've always done and been firm in. Just as the same with communication, right? Some people are very good at communicating, but not everybody is. It's another area that's one of those questionable areas, right? And with establishing boundaries, right, that's key. So if you're saying that you're okay with something, then say it, right? Hey, I really like this, or that was good, I enjoyed that, or I'd like to do more of that, whatever.
Right.
But when you're not, you have to say it too, right?
Yeah.
I'm not comfortable with that, or I didn't like that, or that made me feel awkward.
Right.
But be careful, like you also said about going back and forth with that, right?
Yeah.
That can, again, make boundaries confusing. And so, yeah, communication is key in terms of yes, no, I like that, I don't, right? And being able to establish those things.
Right. It kind of reminds me of peer pressure. Used to talk with teenagers about peer pressure quite often. And if we know our answer, like before we have the question asked to us, we do better at answering, right?
Absolutely.
If someone says, or do you want to try these drugs? And we're like, no, I have to go to the movies tonight, or I have to hang out with friends tonight, or I have to do this. You already have the excuse, so you can say no. It makes it easier.
Yeah, and a piece of that is, I think, prevention, education, right? So maybe having some of those tools, those conversations up front, so that, yes, when people are confronted with something, it doesn't kind of, shock them or completely catch them off guard to where they're not sure, right? They can be more firm in that boundary. So I think in terms of those types of things, it helps with that as well.
Yeah. And people most times don't challenge that then. If you're very strong in your no, like, no, I'm not going to do that, they don't challenge that as much. And when things start to be challenged, or it feels like there's a little bit of an open door, that's, I think, when it becomes a little bit more confusing too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Like, where do I start and where do I end?
Yeah. My kids are really good with determining or discovering when I am kind of on the fence about things. And so you're right. It is a way of kind of seeing your way in that door, right? When there's not such that firm, no, I have this, or no, right? It's what you're communicating. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And the person who we are has many roles a lot of times attached to it. You mentioned you're a parent. I'm a parent. A social worker, a therapist, you name it, right? We can keep naming hats, a committee person, a podcaster, whatever we want to call it, right? We have all these different hats that we can wear. And it seems like and correct me if I'm wrong, LaShawna, it seems like when the value of one of those roles is questioned, it's like we're going to break down certain boundaries of ourselves, or it's easier to break down certain boundaries of ourselves. Is that correct, do you think?
Absolutely. And again, this is going back to that whole sacred piece, right? So we hold some of those hats more sacred, right? Some of those things are much more dear to us, if you will. And so to have those challenged, right? We might have that little crack in the door, as you said, right? To let some things scoot in and or not, right? We might be very aware of our passion and our beliefs in terms of where we stand while we're wearing that hat, if you will, which can help us reinforce that boundary.
Yeah. It brings me back to, of course, my story with burnout too, when I had that hat of the leader on, and I'm also a family guy and a parent, and how those roles were often in conflict. right? And they can have boundaries around each one of them, right? A leader stops and ends at some point,
Right.
and that's where being a parent begins, right? And when I go to work, that's when being a leader begins again, right? And some of those mesh and they kind of come together a little bit, but when they're in conflict or when we're not, striving towards balance, it seems like, that's when the barriers start getting broken down, right? Because I was distracted at home and, I wasn't present at home as much, because I'm trying to fill a shift or, there's a crisis happening or something like that at work where, again, I feel like I'm called into the situation rather than, relying on other people to solve that issue. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a great point. And it just almost made me laugh out loud because I thought of an interaction I had at home with my own daughter. And yes, I was kind of still wearing a hat in my home that should have maybe been taken off before I entered the home. And my daughter knew it, right? She knew that I still was in that mind frame. And again, there was the crack in that door, right? She saw her way in.
Yeah.
And so she kind of was pulling me into my mom role. But like I said, I was still had the other hat on. And so.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And sometimes our boundaries need reestablishing and constant reinforcement, right? People need to know who we are.
Yes.
At what time, right? So learning to say, hey, right now I'm a parent and I can't, go help you move a couch, or, right now I'm a parent and I can't help answer this question, so please call the on-call,
right,
or something like that, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Seems cold, but it's not.
Yes. And you bring up a good point because I think parenting is a great one because we have to work to pay our bills and there's all these things, that are attached to that. But when your kid is sick or in need of you as a parent, right? It's such a tug and pull. And but I think you make a good point in terms of learning where to say, I can't take that call right now, or, this individual is handling that, or, I'll be in tomorrow at whatever time, right? So reestablishing, reinforcing that. And you're also then, I think, letting your child know also the importance of the boundary. Yeah. As the parent and as the professional, right? Because we're role modeling those things for them as well.
For sure. And I think just respecting, surrounding ourselves with people who respect those things too helps, right?
Absolutely.
And if I'm really good at explaining to people what my values are and how sometimes maybe they're not being met or they're in conflict, right? If I have a supervisor, and thankfully we do have this supervisor that when we say we have a sick child, she's like, oh, see you later.
Right.
We'll take care of the rest.
Right.
We're like, okay, I'll cancel my appointments and I'll do this and I'll do that. She's like, no, you have a sick child. You're going to be at home, right? So sometimes having that support system to help us, like, no, we can help you establish these boundaries and stay, authentically you is an important piece too, right?
Absolutely. It's huge.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah. Learning to say no is hard though. Because it feels
hard.
Selfish sometimes.
It does. And I actually talk with individuals within the therapy session about it. I've had individuals ask me, is this self-centered? Does this make me look self-absorbed, right? Taking care of themselves. They're questioning that. And and what I often say is, no, it's great that you're learning how to create a boundary, right? Because we're conflicted, right?
Yeah,
and it's amazing to me to see individuals growing and questioning these things. And again, that is the beauty in the therapeutic process as well, is we get to walk alongside these individuals and they're sharing with us and those tools in that process, right? But the establishment of boundaries is huge.
It is. And it's saying that I can have all of me, at given times at all the time, right? Because what really came to mind just there when you were saying, I can't remember what you were saying, but it triggered something in my brain, right? Wow, there's some ADHD for you.
You're in the right place.
All right. But I was like, okay, so I have all these roles that make me uniquely me. And sometimes when one of them is being challenged, like self-care, right? Mm-hmm. That's a piece of me that I need to make sure I'm healthier in all the other roles of my life. But when that's being challenged, sometimes, like, does it make me a bad this role make me a bad mom? Does it make me a bad dad to care for myself? Because then I'm not spending 100% of my time with my kids or when I'm home, or I'm not spending 100% of this, at, work 100% 24/7, in this role, right?
Right.
So it's oftentimes that label again that's automatic. Like, okay, when I'm not in this role, it must mean that I'm bad at all these other roles, right? And that's where those things start getting broken down and confusing too. I don't know. Does that resonate with you?
Yeah, this is going to be something I think many of us have heard people refer to over time, is that, and I've said this with clients, is, we can't pour into somebody else's cup if ours is empty, right? And so what you're describing is, some of those things where, we think that that's what we have to do, because we do. We want to help others. We want to be there for people.
Right.
And what we're missing sometimes is that, what about us? That self-care piece. Like, I'm exhausted, right?
Right.
And so what happened to my boundaries? What are my boundaries?
Exactly.
Where do I do that? So,
Yeah. And I think we have, that all or nothing thinking, right? I have to be this role or this role or this role or this role, rather than saying I can be this role and this role and this role and this role. And all of these things can be part of me.
Yes. And that's what, again, that goes back to our well-being, and that's what makes us who we are. That's our authentic selves, right?
Yes.
Because I am not a mom without my professional side, or being a daughter, or being a friend, right? All of those things play into each other and or make them better, right?
Absolutely.
I take pieces from all of those hats, if you will,
right,
to make me that mom, right? And so, absolutely.
That's incredible. Yeah. And they keep us safe, right?
Oh, yeah.
Having those boundaries, understanding that we can have all these roles and there's an and in there, not an or, right?
Yeah.
And it keeps us safe because it builds that harmony. I know we were talking in the first episode, I believe, about this idea of harmony, and how when our values are aligned and we're our authentic selves and we're on the path to thriving, we are feeling this harmonious start of feeling, and the boundaries help us keep it that way. Right. And they will be challenged.
Yes, they will be challenged. But it's hard to be harmonious if you don't feel safe, right? And so, yes, boundaries keep us safe. There are physical, of course, and psychological or emotional boundaries. And we can tell someone not to touch us, right? So that is an example of a physical boundary, right?
Oh, sure.
If you're uncomfortable with somebody's touch, you can say, I'm not comfortable with that. Please don't touch me. This often makes us feel safe. And if we are uncomfortable with touch for whatever reason, right, it's okay to say that.
Yeah.
When someone is asking too much of us, as you were alluding to, right? Because we're in all these various roles, work, school, family, etc. This is in relation to time and stress, right?
Yeah, right.
And this is an example of an emotional boundary, right? So again, I would just like to note here that as individuals, we really don't owe anybody an explanation or justification as to why we have a boundary. So if we're not comfortable with touch or whatever, we don't have to justify that, right? We just have to make sure we're communicating that we are not okay with something.
Yeah. No, I'm not okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just like that, right?
Yes.
And when someone says, well, come on, it's not really that bad. No, I'm not okay with that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it has to be pretty firm in those things too, right? So, and another, thing that comes to mind here too is just, there was, I don't know, a time a couple of weeks ago, we have a lot of stuff going on within in a semester. We're in a school system, so we break down things into semesters, and we always have lots of activities, right?
Indeed.
And we always have lots of great ideas. Well, they're great ideas, right? We're like, we want to do this and this and this and this and this and this. And finally, we have to prioritize which ones we want to pull off well, right?
Yes.
and make sure we prioritize those things. But an example of that is, we want to do this poverty simulation, right?
Yes.
And it would be amazing to roll it out this semester, but I think we had to say no. And we didn't say it in a rude way, right? Sometimes we think it's a rude thing. It's like, we're not going to be able to pull that off very effectively, with this timeline. So let's do a soft launch in the summer and do it really well in the fall, right?
Yes.
That's a way of saying, no, I can't do it right now, but we're going to do it. Here's my plan to do it because I think it's important to me too.
Yes. And we really want to give a quality experience, right? And so, just again, reinforcing that. And that is the establishment, right, of who we are, again, as professionals, right? And so, while we had to maybe take a step back and not get so excited about that poverty simulation, because we've all kind of agreed that, this would be a great thing. Right. But realizing that, we're going to have to say no right now.
Yep. It's establishing and keeping us safe as professionals and doing things effectively, right?
Yes.
But, as for you as the listener, boundaries and safety, of course, it always comes, I think consent always comes up to me, kind of what Lashana was alluding to there. And it's an enthusiastic no or an enthusiastic yes, right? There's no in between, right? And if people aren't respecting those things, of course, we need to report to the authorities if it's gone too far. Or, we need to exit the relationship, if people are pressuring us to do things that we don't want to do.
Yes.
It's okay, right?
It's absolutely okay. So. And finding an individual, if you feel so inclined, to support you through that process, if you do decide, right, is absolutely another way to be able to do that and feel safe, right?
Yeah. Even psychologically, if people are pushing you to places that you're not comfortable with, it can create a psychological unsafety environment, if that made any sense. Unsafe environment. There we go. Yeah. We need to say, no, I'm not going to do that. And you're okay saying that, right? Hopefully you hear that from us, that please be okay. Say no. If you feel unsafe, leave or call the police.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
It's easier said than done occasionally, but, in those cases, please reach out.
Yes. And I concur. Yes. We are here to say it is okay for you to say no. Yes.
Yeah. Yep. Boundaries are healthy.
Boundaries are extremely healthy.
Even though they're hard and we talk about the establishment of me and what is a boundary and how do we set the boundary, right? We need to know more before, right?
Yes.
So we know what our boundaries are before we have to establish them or reinforce them. It's a lot easier when we know them. And the way we do that is sometimes we just got to write them down.
Yes.
Practice them.
Yes. That's one of my favorite tools to use in therapy.
Right. Like, no, LaShawn, I'm not going to do this right now. Right. I can't walk right now. I have to do new notes or whatever.
Well, hey.
Right. I'm not going to dinner with you because I'm eating my salad.
That's a good boundary.
Those are boundaries, right? We joke about them, but yes, we set them with each other.
Yes, all the time.
Right. So boundaries are healthy, and we've been affected in many different ways, when those have been crossed. For me, it was burnout early on, and it's been a variety of other things too, right? Sometimes it's the lack of, feeling valued in a relationship, and sometimes it's just saying, hey, I'm not feeling valued, and saying that piece of my boundary doesn't feel good. And that person says, okay, well, maybe that they're not going to say this right away, right? What's your love language, right? That's what I was going to say. Like, wow, everybody's just well-versed in love languages, right? But usually that's the piece that's missing, and we have to just sort of say, hey, I need more acts of service, or I need some words of affirmation, right? That's missing for me, right? So sometimes people don't know, that they're crossing a boundary, so we need to establish one to let them know and keep us healthy and safe.
Yes, absolutely. And I've mentioned in episodes previously that I have been affected by addiction throughout my life, which admittedly has made the creation of and adherence to boundaries extremely hard.
Oh, I believe it. Yeah.
Extremely hard. And from a very young age at that. And so I've learned the hard way that saying no is important. And, I've always wanted to help those that are struggling. I wanted them to know that I cared. These were and are people that who hold an important space in my life, right? These are people that I hold sacred to me.
Good word.
And however, allowing them free reign, if you will, has just caused me a great deal of anger, stress, worry, sleepless nights, guilt. all of those not so good feelings, right?
All in the name of protecting, right?
Yes. And, you know, I've come to a point in my life, and I am not going to be on this podcast and lie. I'm working on these things, but I'm in that space where I'm realizing that I have to start saying no.
Right.
And, you know, I do admit that, again, these are things that I'm working on. So I'm not perfect at it, but I'm doing it more often, and I am conscious of it. I'm aware.
Right.
And this wasn't just important for me to learn to say no and put up those boundaries in the sense of standing up for myself, but also in the sense that many of the things, right, that I've been asked to do by some of those struggling with addiction in my life have to learn to deal with his or her own consequences as well, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And so, again, like you spoke to, it can be many relationships, many hats, right? But part of the boundary piece is, that we're not accepting responsibility, right, for something that's not ours to accept responsibility for.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah. And I think, you know, addiction is so cunning and baffling and just completely powerful that, when we love someone who has an addiction, it's really, we call it enabling, and everybody's heard that
too.
word.
There
right?
it is.
Ooh, right. But that's what we're doing. And
Yes.
ouch. It's hard to hear sometimes, right?
It's hard to hear, but I think what you said, where you begin and where the other individual ends, it's really hard to know that addiction because it's chaotic, right?
It is.
And everybody's kind of in that chaos. And so, yes, learning where and how to draw that line is so difficult. And so I felt like that was a really good way to illustrate boundaries, if you will.
It is because addiction's potentially, fatal, they say, right? So it could end up in death. And boy, is that scary when we love someone.
Absolutely.
Right? So yes, I'm going to enable and do all these things that are, in a sense, propelling them towards that sort of fatal end, that progression of the addiction.
Right.
And that goes with anything, really, codependency, with, unproductive relationships. It just gets more unproductive when we're doing those things and enabling people to do things that are crossing our boundaries.
Right. And I even go back, parenting, right?
Oh,
and
sure.
our children, right? As they grow older and they're adults, right?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, drawing a boundary, because again, they have to learn consequences, right? There's all these things that we can enable as parents too. And so, there's just so many relationships, coworkers, friends, colleagues, all these types of things that occur. It's not just under the umbrella of addiction.
Right. Yeah, my 3-year-old, one of them, I have 2 3-year-olds at home. One of them really likes
lucky you.
candy, like a ton of candy, and like unhealthy amounts of candy, like he wouldn't stop eating candy. But when I'm running behind in the morning, let's say, because he loves to like wake up first thing and like, can I have some candy? And that's not okay, right? That's not a good habit to form, to build, right? I know that as a parent, but here's where I'll cross my boundary is when the whining starts. And sometimes he's really good at whining. And
the crack in the door.
Right? I got to get to work. I got to get this other thing done. I got to have, breakfast done and all these things and the meal prep for the day and, all those other things and, get someone ready for school and all those things. It's pretty easy to be like, yeah, just have the candy, right? But what does that make it? Makes it really hard to know the next morning.
Yeah.
For him too, right? It's confusing. Like, well, Dad did it this time, and remember that time I threw that really big fit, and he gave it to me anyway. Right. That enabling behavior is something so easy to fall into.
Yes, and it continues even into their late teens and 20s.
Right. Hey, even, sometimes us as adults do things like that.
Indeed, we do.
We make excuses like, have that extra onion ring or whatever it may be. Oh. Ooh. Right?
Oh.
So it's a constant work, and it does keep us from going into those burnout or compassion fatigue, right? And those happen in all relationships, right?
Absolutely.
When we're no longer contributing to the relationship and we're just numb, that's compassion fatigue.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. Nothing left to give. So, boundaries protect us and are empowering.
Ooh.
Let's talk about empowerment.
Yeah.
We don't talk about empowerment and boundaries are me, right? That's empowering stuff. It gives us individuality. It's things that keep us empowered, right? Because if I have enough fuel in my tank, because I'm doing all the things that are, balanced and helping me thrive, it's easier to stay empowered, right? Are we going to stay empowered all the time? Are we going to thrive all the time? Are we going to be happy all the time? No.
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 Unfortunately not.
Right? But the more we focus on continuing to fill those cups, keep those fuel tanks full, we're going to stay a little bit stronger in our stance and in standing for our boundaries and things like that, right? It's when we're tired, hungry, lonely, tired, that halt, right? We're going to be more susceptible to breaking our boundaries.
Yes, and I think boundaries are empowering because, and I say this all the time as well, it teaches us what our worth is, right? We get to know our worth, right? It helps us to understand who we are, our identity.
Yes.
It reinforces the idea of individuality, right?
Amen. Yes.
And yeah, it talks about what we like, what we don't, what we're willing to tolerate.
Right.
And what we're willing to accept responsibility for.
Ooh, yeah. See, there's that piece right there, right? It's not all rainbows and butterfly, right? That would be called toxic positivity. That's not a good thing either, because there's pieces of boundaries that are empowering when we accept responsibility for it, right? Like, yeah, I created, a little bit of a whining thing in the morning, right? And it's going to be hard to break that cycle because I've given the candy, right? But I'm going to stick to it. And that can be empowering too, right?
Absolutely.
It's teaching someone else self-control and respect for themselves too.
Yeah, and you get to learn about yourself in that process, right?
Yeah.
So that's anytime we're learning about ourselves, right? We might be coming from, like you said, oh, well, I gave in, right? I gave him the candy. And so you might be feeling a little down. But like you said, you're showing him and you're learning, right? So you're bettering yourself. And that's empowering.
It is.
Yeah.
It is. And that means to everybody out there, the beautiful pieces of us, those amazing pieces of us, those ugly, not fun pieces of us, those kind of challenging pieces of us, when we're working on them through the establishment of me, it's empowering.
It is. It's beautiful.
It is.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And I hope that listeners out there realize that it's beautiful, right? None of us are perfect. None of us are. And so learning who we are, it's part of the journey of life, right? If we had it all figured out, how much fun would we be having?
None. Yeah, right.
And part of that process is setting boundaries. And they're going to change and they're going to blur, right?
Right.
And that's okay.
It is.
It's the awareness piece and how we come back from it because we're resilient too. That's also part of the beauty of the human condition is that we're resilient.
Yeah. Yep. And that's where that reestablishment piece comes in.
Yes.
Right. We better move into our goals, I think.
Okay.
Yeah, right? Boundaries are important with our goals.
They are, and man, I have not done well again.
I've really been slipping here, too, I think, as the seasonal affective disorder ramps up here. And but we have a great day of sunshine today, so I think we're all getting a taste of, yes, we're ready to spring free, right?
I hope so.
To stop being dormant, if you will.
Yeah.
Yeah. So healthy eating. I'm doing it 5 days a week, consistently, morning and afternoon.
Awesome.
Struggle at night a little bit. I do like, last night that ice cream cone was calling my name. I didn't establish the boundary. I enabled myself, and I had the ice cream cone. So, right, I still need to work on that night routine. The exercise piece of it for me, I'm getting 1 to 2 per week. Really, again, it's on Lashana. This is all her responsibility.
No, I'm drawing a line.
Yes, right. But, when I have that supportive person at work who says, hey, I'm going on a walk, and I'm like, all right, I'm coming with you. That helps me get those exercise components in. So maybe I have to rethink, is morning time really the best time for exercise? Is there another time I can build it in? So I really got to evaluate that, I think, over the next week. Because I'm not doing so well at that. Meditation practice slipped a little bit because I was jumping into my day a little quickly. And I started again, got back on it again this morning. And it was amazing. I was in this just serene virtual world because I'm doing it through VR. And I was sitting at the end of a a fishing dock, I think it was. And there was this calm water in front of me. These trees were towering over me. And it was humbling and just grateful experience. And I got to say, I was way more focused for the day.
Wow, that's awesome.
And it was fun. So there's that.
Sounds like a great way to start the day.
Right. I should do it more often. Like my goal says I should. Right. And it's important to me. Yes.
Yes. So now it's my turn and my goal of reading. Well, I didn't pick it up again. I know last week I talked about taking a picture and sending it. I didn't even do that. And, you made a good point in terms of the boundaries being applied here, too. I didn't create the boundary for myself in terms of, you know what, I'm going to read because it's something I wanted to do.
Right,
Something I wanted to do. It's something I enjoy, but I didn't do it. I let all that other stuff get in the way, and I didn't make time for it. I didn't make space for my reading, and so I did not do well in that area.
Which is essentially kind of your self-care, right?
It is.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So you didn't take care of yourself last week.
I did not.
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah. Yuck. But however, in asserting myself, I have, I'm using my vocal skills a little more. I know initially I talked more about my appearance and my attire in terms of being assertive, but I am using my voice more. And
awesome.
I am baby stepping it. So, in terms of it not always necessarily being a one-to-one scenario when I am asserting myself, I'm doing it in groups because that's a comfort for me.
She hasn't progressed to the loudspeaker in the school.
So there have been a couple occasions where I have actually spoken out within my profession, and
That's amazing.
It was frightening, yes, but I did it, and yeah. So that goal, yes.
Yes, that's amazing.
Thanks.
Yeah, good for you.
Thank you.
All
right. So that's all for today. Join us next week as we will discuss the mindset. This is Lashana.
And Josh.
Stay authentic, well, and empowered.